Ask the Podcast Coach for May 18th, 2024.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music. That means it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. I think we got a little echo going back out to them again. I don't know what's going on. At least I'm hearing that. Good to see you this morning, and welcome to a crazy Saturday morning.
Yes. And now we're back. Okay, yes. The echo has been taken care of. That's so, yeah. We had some weird stuff going on with Ecamm this morning. Jim couldn't join, and it's good now. Okay. And I need to give a quick shout out to Rich Graham, who, this is why I always say you need an outside set of eyes, because you miss stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten a lot of really good feedback on the third episode of the Your Podcast website show. And Rich is the only guy that caught it. I didn't catch it. That we go to a break and I come back and I say my guest website. I did it right in other places, but it was wrong. And he was nice enough to buy me a coffee so he could then say, hey, just for the record, you might want to fix that, which I'm going to later today. But you need somebody to go, hey, don't know if you know this or not, but that's not working. So thank you for that, Rich. It's greatly appreciated. And, sometimes we just need to chill out and take a step back. And you know what really helps you with that?
A little coffee. Sometimes it wires you, but most of the time it chills you out. A little coffee.
So Jim's grabbing the pot. There it is. That lovely coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. And, well, you know what? I'll show you something in a second. But Mark is the guy that has designed Ask the Podcast Coach. He designed the School of Podcasting logo and Podcast Rodeo show, which in a second I will show you is going to be rebranded to Podcast Hot Seat. And, of course, Mark was the guy behind that. Why? Because he's the guy that when you are getting ready to launch your show, and we talk a lot about artwork. This could be an entire website. It could be a PDF or a lead magnet, anything that you want to look good. You talk to Mark, you bring him your idea. He brings decades of marketing experience to you and make sure that whatever it is you're designing is going to match the mood, the feel, everything you want about your show to be right there. And he's great about it. He sent me one for Podcast Hot Seat. And I was like, that's good. Can we make the letters just a little bigger? And he was like this. And I go, perfect. It was super easy. So I'm being played off, but podcastbranding.co. Go see my buddy, Mark.
And of course, big thanks to our good friend Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast.com. This week, the movies, Darkest Hour, The New World, and The Other Bullion Girl. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Boleyn. Those are available for you now. If you're interested in knowing, is it based on a true story or is it not? Dan probably has it. Check it out today, based on a true story podcast.com. Dan, thanks for your sponsorship.
Yes. And I mentioned Podcast Hot Seat. Voila. There's the artwork from Mark.
Oh, nice.
And so now it's a matter of
nothing better than a Yeti on fire.
There's nothing better than a Yeti on fire. Yeah, when I told him, he heard me say, I think I'm going to rebrand this. And when I got the domain and everything, he was like, I got an idea for the Yeti. And I'm like, excellent. So yeah. And again, as soon as I saw it, I was like, perfect. It's just, I think part of that too is the more you work with Mark, the more he knows what you like.
Yeah.
He's like ChatGPT. Just give him feedback and he answers better. And except he's, human and has a sense of humor and things of that nature. So
is he though? Is he? Could he just be early versions of AI?
You never know. Well, he is polite. And I always thought that was because he was Canadian. Maybe it's because Mark is really just an advanced cyborg of some sort.
He's pretty good. Yeah.
You never know. Here's some fun news, and people are up in arms, and that is, of course, especially if you are using our good friends over at Spotify for Podcasters, they have decided that, do you remember, first of all, I love the way they launched this. Remember when they said you can play music on your podcast? Mm-hmm. And then it was asterisk, we have to approve every episode, asterisk, only available on the app, asterisk, only for people who have paid for it. And so, yeah, they have decided to get rid of that. And really what they're doing, they kind of are in the middle of getting rid of Anchor, but not the hosting part. They're just going to be a host is what they're going to do. And so they have announced that they're getting rid of the Talk Plus Music, I think is what they called it. And they've gotten rid of their editing stuff. Now they have partnered with Riverside. So if you still want to, I don't know if you can use Riverside on a phone, but that's the problem. All these people that are making podcasts on their phone are like, what are we going to do? We don't have any place to go. And my answer is, well, I don't know. You could maybe not do your podcast on your phone like everybody else. And that's where I just feel like the curmudgeon in me is coming out like, get a computer, but I just, to me, I don't know, if you go to the top 20, top 100 of any kind of chart, I'm pretty sure you're not going to find somebody using their phone for a podcast. I could be wrong, but to me, I'm like, on one hand, I want everybody to have a podcast and get your message out there however you want it. So I hate to discourage people, but on the other hand, I'm like, but if you do want people to listen to it, you can't put it on speaker, throw it on a desk, 4 feet away from you, and expect people to listen to that when they could listen to somebody who's, talking into a $69 microphone. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jim?
Yeah. Well, it's a good way to practice. I mean, it's a good way to get started, get some practice in, do some work. I mean, there's better ways to get it done. It can be done that way if your content is compelling and people are willing to kind of put up with that. A boomy room or whatever. Yeah, maybe it will work. But
there we go.
Like I said, good way to get started. Good way to get started.
Well, and Chris has the answer from castahead.net. You can do a podcast via Riverside and StreamYard on your phone. So there's that. Yeah. So there you go. That's.
You can.
Yeah.
Listen. 10 years ago, maybe more, maybe 12 now. I remember doing an episode of fitness tech off my laptop, and I thought, it won't matter. Again, this was 12 years ago. It won't matter. It'll be fine. And I remember getting a comment back on that show, like, "Hey, it's kind of hard to hear you when when you do it that way." It wasn't a very good laptop, but so there are people who do listen, and it can matter. The best audio you can get is preferable, but
yeah. I mean, sometimes you got to use what you got. And if it's a 13-year-old kid that's trying to do a podcast and, they don't want to ask for a, Samsung Q2U for their birthday because they'd rather get a video game. I'm painting with a very wide brush here, but
yeah, you are.
Yeah,
you are.
Yeah.
Don't pick on the kid. Don't pick on the kids.
I do. We have a great comment though. When I put up the artwork for Podcast Hot Seat, Randy says, "A blue Yeti on fire. How ironic." Let's see. Let's see. Ralph has a question somewhere, and I missed the first one, but I'm seeing the second one. He says, "I'm specifically talking about a coach who works with people for improving delivery storytelling." If you're looking for storytelling, I can't find his original question. The book you want to read, you want to listen to, hands down, on a scale from 1 to 10, it's a 15. Like, I've read almost every book on storytelling, and the one you want to do is this one, Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. He is a Yoda. He is the Obi-Wan Kenobi of storytelling. He really is. It's almost like, have you ever watched The Good Doctor? I've watched like a couple episodes, and it's about this young man that's autistic. So he's kind of a little bit on the spectrum, hyper-focused kind of thing going on, and he's a really good doctor, but he has like zero kind of bedside manner kind of stuff. And Matthew Dix he's a really nice guy, but he just sees stories. Like, he can listen to somebody's story and just at the end go, well, if he had moved this here and done this, and I would have taken this part out. And I never argue. You're like, that would have made that better. He's just, and this is one of those books that the next time I listen to it, I'm going to not be walking around the neighborhood or in the car. I'm like, I'm going to sit down with a notepad and paper because there's stuff that I have. He just makes it sound. And of course, this goes back to all the good people, anyone who's super talented, they make it look super easy. Mm-hmm. And he is a guy that it just makes it sound like if I check this, okay, do we have, we're starting closest to the transition. Okay, got that. And then there are stakes. Yep, stakes are here. Like if I just check these things, it'll be a great story. And then you do that and you're like, yeah, that's not really it. I don't know. He's won like the Moth Grand Slam like 5 or 6 times. So yeah, if you're looking for storytelling, Ralph, this is why it's back here on. I got my book on the left-hand side and I got Storyworthy on the right because I'm constantly grabbing that and going, this is the book you want. So it's an interesting skill too, because there are people that are great storytellers, and then there are other people that are absolutely brilliant, and they can't get it to come out of their mouth in a way that doesn't put you to sleep. I'm not going to say who it was. There was a speaker at the event I went to in Cleveland, and look, they're not all going to be great, but I almost get the feeling this was somebody like this was their first time talking. And it just, the first time up, you're probably over nervous and things like that. And you could tell they knew what they were talking about, but the actual presentation was like, this needs to go back in the oven a little bit and see what's going on. So yeah, Randy has another great person here, Eric K. Johnson, better known as Podcast Talent Coach. He's a great guy, especially not that his new episodes are bad, but his first episodes were all about shaping your content. And his new ones are a little more business focused because that's what his audience wanted. And so, but if you go back to the early ones, he's a great guy. I mean, he's interviewed like super famous people. He's a program director for iHeart. And he explains how to get stories out of people and things like that. John Jamango says the StreamYard app on the phone is for guests only. You can't host from your phone. There you go. And also, speaking of this, John let me know that if you're on Rumble, a couple weeks ago we streamed a Rumble, but there's a thing there's basically a StreamYard built into Rumble. And I don't think you can do the fun, text on screen kind of stuff. But if you're into free, because Rumble's free and StreamYard's not and Ecamm's not and all the other ones, it might be something. He was like, it's actually pretty cool. So maybe that's why we always tell people to go to askthepodcastcoach.com/live, because that way, if I ever want to play with that in the future, you just go to live and I'll point it at that. So it's always fun. Ralph says, I'm looking for a coach for improving my delivery on my podcast. That's a good one. Because I've heard you, Ralph. I mean, the biggest thing, I would think, Jim, the things that ruin a delivery are people that are reading their delivery and they talk like that's always a no-brainer. The one that I think is super easy to do that I see that to me just ruins the flow is, you'll have somebody's playing music, right? And they're like, it's the beginning of the show and they're like, this is the show where we do such and such and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden they stop and it goes, okay, welcome to the show. And it just... So have that music fade out as you fade in, and it's just a lovely handoff to that. But I think that's a great question on my delivery. And then part of it is, well, go ahead. You looked like you were in thought.
Yeah. One of the thoughts on this is developing your own kind of on-air personality that's consistent. And I think a lot of folks try, I shouldn't say a lot. Some try to be somebody they're not. And then you got to keep up that persona. And it's hard if you're going to go with the long game on this. It's hard to kind of maintain a personality you're not. Eventually, the real personality starts sneaking through, right? So, I think of some of the old radio guys like Paul Harvey, who didn't have a very conventional, hello, Americans.
Yes.
These long gaps.
Page
Good
2.
Day. Yeah. Page 2. Ace Hardware, whatever. he had his own unique style. That was him, right? And did he talk that way when you were if you ever were talking to him just normally? Probably not, right?
Excuse me, son. Son, could you please pass the potatoes?
The potato. Exactly. Yes. You hear this sometimes in memes, everybody's got the Captain Kirk meme, going for time. So, but I think finding that rhythm for yourself that you're comfortable with, that you like, and I think that just takes practice. You just got to get out and do it. Listen to yourself. Ralph, I don't know if you ever go back and listen to yourself, record it, and then listen to it a couple days later critically. Man, that has done so much for me in the work that I've done, just to make sure you listen again. I could have done that better, or I shouldn't say those kinds of things, or I shouldn't do those kinds of things. I think you have to be critical. That's the hard part for a lot of podcasters, is they want to record it. They just don't want to listen to it. And I think you have to really listen with a critical eye, not saying you shouldn't get some feedback from a pro, right? So find that person and get it. But I think the work it takes to do it is being very, very critical about your own audio, your own video. And I was just chatting. I just did this a second ago. I was just chatting with my editor at work, and I said, I wish I had $1 for every time I've interrupted myself or not finished a sentence in the show. He goes, "Oh, you'd have $10 million."
Yeah.
He just totally threw me under the bus. And listen, he edits my stuff every single day. So he knows me maybe better than I know me in the way I speak. Yeah. That kind of critical feedback is key.
Yeah. He said, he says, I found myself telling more about myself on my episode coming on a Monday. I actually got very emotional. I think it'll play well. Just looking for tips on how to connect with viewers. Yeah, I'm going to edit it out of the episode, but I interviewed Mark Lawley, who does the Practical Prepping show at practicalprepping.info. Now, Mark is from Alabama, and it's obvious that Mark is from Alabama because, he's got a major accent, right? And it's cool. You know me, I love accents. And I asked him, and I thought about it later. I was listening back. I go, this is I don't know if it's rude, but Jim, I don't ask you because, you kind of sound like me. We don't really, here's the thing. I have an accent. It's called whatever, Northwest, whatever. But I asked Mark about his accent because he doesn't sound like me. And I thought, I think it's borderline rude in a way. Because I don't ask anybody else, hey, does anybody ever comment on your accent? I'm like, why did you ask that, Dave? And I think just because he's obviously from the South. But his answer was great. He's like, look, I know I'm from the South. And he's like, I'm just being me. And I was like, I liked that answer, but I'm like, why did I even ask that question? That's a weird one. But that's really what it boils down to. So to me, I still don't know what the deal was. I was in Houston, and it was a Saturday night, and a bunch of us went to Joel Osteen, who I refer to as the Happy Jesus Man. It was an amazing event. The minute they found out we were new, literally down to the seventh row, total white glove experience. So glad you're here. It was amazing, right? The service was amazing. The band was amazing. And in the middle of the thing, he got a little weepy, right? And I'm like, okay. The next day, it's live. It's Sunday. It's a different service. And he got weepy in the same spot at the same. And I was like, is this planned? Or is it actual legit? And I think that's it. We're all looking for, and I'm not saying who knows, but it was still a great service. But anyway, anytime, especially the young kids love transparency and authenticity. And if that's authentic, do it. I don't know. I've had that happen a couple times. I'll be talking about something that gets me get a little verklempt in the throat, So if that's cool, do that. But I think it does boil down to just be yourself, because if you try to be somebody else, if I try to be obnoxious sports guy right now, I've said this before. I did a podcast once in a character, and I would last about 7 minutes before I would just fall out of character and end up sounding like me, because it's easy to be me. It's hard to be a character. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, your characters tend to be a little over the top too, which is even
Yeah.
which is even harder to maintain. So you can't do it for very long. Yeah, I get comfortable. I have this I have a gal that I work with at work, and she says your podcasts help put my kids to sleep sometimes. So she'll put on the Gallup podcast. She's like, I don't know, it's the soothing tones of your voice or whatever. Like, hey, however I can help, that's pretty awesome. So her 2-year-old has listened to some of my podcasts before bed.
Nice.
Apparently the voice is soothing. So yeah, just kind of go with it. Go with what you have. Go with it, and then be comfortable with it. I mean, don't try to change it, or don't just find a rhythm and then stick with it. And my cadence here on this show, because I'm with you, is a little bit different than what you might get on Home Gadget Geeks, or what you might get on even on the Gallup podcast. Those may be three. I approach those in three very different ways because they're three different audiences. So even that approach may change a little bit slightly based on kind of where I'm at, what I'm doing.
Yeah, we're getting lots of comments in the chat room here. And really, it's all about accents. I mean, Craig, I love Craig, but he mentions using pitch, pauses, intonation, volume, word stress helps, right? That kind of stuff to improve your delivery and enhance audience engagement and attention. And I think that's one of those things, because I don't even think about it when I do it. It's something when I have that kind of, this is important kind of thing. Like if you're speaking, right? And you go, this is important, and you pound on the pan, you wake up people in church. There are things you can do. And Craig's right. It pauses, everything. When I used to teach guitar, I would show somebody 6 notes. And I'm like, okay, you got 6 notes. And I go, now I want you to play a lead with just those 6 notes. And they're like, what? And they'd be like, dan, 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 dan. And I'm like, okay, what else you got? And I'm like, look, there's so many times, like if I only had such and such, and I'm like, you got 6 notes. And I'd be like, go ahead, play this, give me some rhythm to play to. And just using 6 notes, like you can play them fast, you can play them slow, you can bend them, you can, there's all sorts of things. And your voice, I think that's why the guitar is so much fun. It's real similar to the human voice, and the fact that, you can make things, you can sound like Stevie Nicks if you want to. You can, bend strings, all sorts of stuff. And, you don't really know until you try it or whatever. As I'm talking, I don't think, ooh, I should slow down here. It's just, it just happens. And when I'm excited, when I was talking to people at that Cleveland event, and I talked to this one guy about AI, and his hand started moving, and he started talking, and you could just tell he was super passionate about it, and everything was. And it was funny because I kind of lost track of what he was saying because I was so mesmerized at his body language. I'm like, ooh, I just pushed his button. So it's one of those things that, you just kind of do. John says, I have those pauses because I'm about to start a round of boomer charades because I can't think of a person, place, or thing. Yep, there you go. That's a way to pause. Beauty Bubble says pausing, knowing those moments to allow your listeners to hear what was said. Introduce a new topic is also a good time to pause. I'm also learning as Ralph is. Yeah, that is something that I purposely do. I've mentioned how I edit for a team of brain surgeons. And there are times when they just do a giant brain dump of, the blah, blah, blah is 1.6 and this is that. And that is why the reference, and they don't go right into a question, but they pause. And I leave that pause in there because the audience has to digest, what the heck did that guy just say? And so as much as we think we have to play some sort of transition music, one way to transition is to just shut up. I mean, Paul Harvey, again, used to do that. He'd be sitting there and there'd be a pause and he'd be like, people in North Dakota are upset that beavers are, it's like, there was no like, should we talk about the beavers now? Yeah, Paul, let's talk about the beavers. He just shut up and then let your brain kind of take a break, and then he'd come in with a new one. And as for accents, John says, I didn't even know I had an accent until I started a podcast. I have a Philly accent that everyone makes fun of. You know, there's Chicago.
Well, don't throw snowballs at Santa Claus, for God's sakes.
Yeah. And Craig says, you know, everyone has an accent. Accents are cool.
Yep.
It's part of who you are. And Ralph's saying I should leave it in the question to Mark. And I'm like, well, there's some really cool stuff that, you know, he started with like a $30 like Sony recorder. It'd be like starting with a Zoom, you know, H1 or something like that. And now he's got, you know, thousands of people in a Facebook group.
If I think if you ever want to be humbled about, listen, those of us, well, we all talk about everyone else's accents, right? You live in a local bubble and you don't think you have one, but everybody else does. Start if you've never had the experience where you're with a bunch of native speakers of another language and then you try to speak their language and then watch the expressions on their face, you'll understand what you're doing to them. Right? It's a pretty humbling, if you haven't done that, it's a pretty humbling experience. My friends down in Mexico, when I try to speak Spanish, just crack up. I mean, they just laugh. And you're like, oh, I'm trying, you know, stop laughing at me. And so you do get that, you kind of get that same, you get to experience that if you're trying to speak someone else's language to native speakers. So be careful with it. I think from a coaching standpoint, be careful with accents. Dave, listen, I appreciate your sensitivity to say, maybe that wasn't appropriate. Maybe it was. Some folks in the chat room are like, yeah, it's fine. Some are like, well, nobody said take it out. You're saying take it out. Well, yeah, I think if you're feeling like you should take it out, you should probably take it out.
It's something I was talking with a woman, and she talked about accents. She was from New York. Like she had the whole, you know, Ewan's kind of like, and she was amazing. She was hilarious. And she was talking about, she does a service and it's for women. And I go, look, I realize guys are smelly and, you know, a hassle. And like, I go, but there are times when I'm like, I remember when I was looking for a LinkedIn course or a coach and I found 5 and they were all women that wanted to work with women. And I go, I'm not offended. I go, like, what do we do that you just don't want to work with us? And she's like, well, there are things that people, like women, have to put up with that you probably don't even realize you're doing it. And she goes, for example, my husband has a job and we have children, and yet nobody's ever asked him, how do you do it all? And I was like, I was like, that's a really good point. And so I now, when I was just listening, that's kind of what inspired. I'm like, would I ask, you know, Mark Asquith, like, hey, Mark, in my shoe, I got to do it in my shoe, right? I wouldn't go, hey, Mark, has anybody ever commented on your accent? I don't know. It was just, maybe I was just being too sensitive, but it was just, no. And Mark handled it perfectly. He's like, I'm just being me. Like, he's like, I realize that. And, you know, so.
It's a good question. Craig makes a good point in chat. He says the only problem with accents is when they're too heavy.
Right.
And they impede understanding. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had a co-host in Australia who was a native French speaker, and so he had this combination French and Australian English, and it was, I mean, there were moments it was hard to understand. Now, he worked hard at his communication and he worked hard at his English. So, and we talked about it, and he would really work hard. In fact, he would, for my editor, who, when we would do transcriptions, he would provide some of the questions he was asking to the editor in advance. So when the editor was going through doing the edits, if he didn't understand it, he could see the written form of it, which is extra work, right? But I thought was a great idea in saying, okay, it's key that we get the transcriptions of the questions correct. And it just made it easier for an American editor to get through the content if he had the written out questions. So that's another way to kind of overcome that. This is an area where transcripts can help out greatly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I know Danny from In and Around Podcasting, he's got a wicked accent that I love, and I always forget. He and Colin Gray, and Colin has, I want to say Mark, but they're all either Irish or Scottish. And I always hate to say that because if you even insinuate that one is the other, them's fighting words. But it's a thick accent, and it is in some of those cases, depending on what the topic is, I do have to go from 1.5 to 1.25. And that's not a complaint. It's just like, oh, I want to hear this. This information is so good, I'm willing to take action to make sure I can get it. Chrissy, who's got Great Grooming Dogs, a podcast for groomers, she says, once in a while, my wicked new
market.
That's right. Park your car over there. Yeah. And then Jason says, if I sounded like my parents, Southern, I like who wouldn't have any jobs. That's sad to hear. But it is what it is. She said, DR says, I was afraid that my business name may be considered female-centric, so it's taking a bit of an explanation at the time. So that's one of those where if you have to explain your name, But on the other hand, if you just want to work with women, that's okay. Wait a
minute. Hold on. Sometimes the business name, it's okay if has to be explained. I mean, what is a Spotify? Like, what is that?
That is a good point.
What's a Spreaker? Like those are Amazon doesn't now. I mean, in the beginning, it was the world's largest bookstore, and so you can make the leap. Like, the Amazon, yeah, big rainforest, big bookstore. Okay, I'm there, right? But I don't know, Dave. We sometimes you say this, and maybe I do too. In naming our podcasts and some of those kinds of things, are saying they have to be able to recognize it immediately. I don't know if that's always true. It's a hurdle, but plenty of businesses have overcome the weird business name. Spotify is a perfect example of, yeah. So anyways,
yeah, and that's where you just
need. You knew what an iPod was when it came out,
right?
Did just fine.
Oh man, SP's got it. What's a Libsyn? It's short for liberated syndication, and if you have to explain your name, that's where maybe that's where I come from. The fact that I have to explain what the heck is a Libsyn all the time. Then I'm like, maybe you don't want to name it that, but you like you said, what's a Spotify? Kleenex back in the day, people are like, it's a facial tissue. But
eventually the brand can overcome. I think, eventually the brand can overcome the confusion. It will transcend it. People, and in these cases, actually, it became the brand, right? Give me a Kleenex. Nobody says, I need a tissue. Can I get a facial tissue?
Right.
No, they're like, give me some Kleenex. It's like, it's like aspirin. That was a brand name, right? So,
Google didn't used to mean anything, Craig says. And now it's a verb in a dictionary. And Daniel says good marketing makes up for a bad name in some cases.
Sometimes it makes up for good names too. Like, I mean, you just need good marketing. That's what it all comes down to, is really good marketing. Right? And getting the word out.
And sometimes changing your name is because you have a bad brand. Case in point, The Shack, right? Remember when Radio Shack was, we're The Shack. And I'm watching Young Sheldon because it's coming to the end, so please don't spoil it for me. But I'm on season 2, and he's, as you might imagine, he's in love with Radio Shack because this is Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory as a little kid. And I really got to think, I'm like, why did Radio Shack go out of business? They shouldn't have. Like they had, before Best Buy and things like that, they were the place where you went to get the cables and you went to get that. And the one thing I thought of, though, is like, what they kind of missed out on was they got into the phone business way late. You know what I mean? Verizon, AT&T, they should have been the cell phone place to go to. And they kind of missed that. And they kept asking me, then they annoyed you. They had a very annoying checkout process where they would be like, who's your cell phone service? And I'm like, I just need this cable. Can I not get, and I remember at one point they actually apologized. They're like, we're sorry that we keep asking you if you need any batteries. We'll make it easier to check out. And then they switched from asking you about batteries to your cell phone service. So I think that was part of it. I remember there was a thing, I don't know if it was national, called Sun TV. And it was it's where I bought my first computer. And it was kind of a Best Buy. There was a time there was Hyperstore, Sun TV, and Best Buy. And Sun TV, you would point at something and get a piece of paper, and then you would hand it to somebody, and they would have to go in the back and get it for you. And just the checkout process, when I could go to Best Buy and go, oh, there's the thing I want, pick it up and walk out the store. I swear that's why Sun TV went out of business, is their checkout process. So the actual experience, that's why to bring that back to podcasting, when I go to a website and look, I get if it's a business, you're promoting your business, but there are times when, you go to podcast and it's got a list of all this other stuff and you click on that and you're like, I'm just looking for a play button. Like, and it's okay, finally, and then click, and it's like 5 clicks later, you finally get to hear something. But, Uncle Marv says Blockbuster went out of business and podcasters didn't adapt because they didn't adapt to the audience. Yep. And if we don't adapt to our audience, we're going to get stuck. Yeah.
Pre-iPhone, I went to Radio Shack. This was whenever the iPhone came out. So maybe a year before iPhone came out. And I remember I was talking because they had asked me those questions about an iPhone. I mean, about my phone. And I was like, I tell you what I really want is I want a phone that does, and I listed all these things. Because, before the iPhone, all those things were separate.
Oh, yeah. You had your Palm Pilot.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you had right, flip phones. And I was like, really, I just want a giant screen that can play everything and works like a computer. And the guy at Radio Shack said to me, nobody wants that. What? He's like, yeah, nobody wants that. And I was just like, oh, that dude, that's that is unfortunate. Not to spoil it for you, but Sheldon gets older and meets a guy named Leonard. I'm just saying that.
Well, I've binged that whole thing, and it is, to their credit, they do a really good job of, in comedy, they call it a callback. Like, I just watched the episode because as Sheldon is an adult, he would do something that he thought was funny and then go, bazinga, And so I just saw the episode where he found the company's name was Bazinga that made like whoopee cushions and, snakes in a can and all that stuff. Yeah. So it's fun going, okay, this is that and that whole 9 yards. Yeah. And why am I watching it? Word of mouth. Everybody was talking about, because I think it was last night was the final. It wasn't last night. The third. Anyway, the final thing was out, and it was like the last 3 or 4 episodes. They really tied up, I guess, a bunch of stuff, and everybody was talking about it. And I asked my brother. And he goes, "You haven't watched Young Sheldon?" He goes, "Did you watch The Big Bang Theory?" I go, "Yeah, I loved it." He goes, "Oh, you got to watch." He goes, "It's so well." And what I love about it, it's a 30-minute show. So on Netflix, it's 20 minutes. And you feel like you're watching in warp speed because they give you about a half second to go, no, I'm done, before it goes to the next episode. And then I love this about Netflix. They let you skip the intro, which isn't even, the days of writing a theme song for a show are over, so the little theme song is super next. So, but SPS, what's the next podcasting tech revolution after the smartphone? That's a good one. Well, dynamic ads, that's not really for the...
We're already there.
Yeah.
We're already there.
But what's new? Well, there is the podcasting 2.0 stuff. The thing is going to be, is anyone ever going to adopt that? And it's taking so incredibly long. I'm still...
Is it really taking... I mean, we've been talking about it. Do we expect it to be done in 2 months? I mean, it's been out there for a while, but I don't know if it's taking that long. There's something. Listen, there has to be an evolution that has to take place for a lot of these things. We have anytime you're replacing an ecosystem, which we have a very well entrenched podcasting ecosystem. It works. It works and it works well. Anytime you try to replace that or even add on to it, there's going to be resistance. And it's just going to take some time. Some folks need to see some benefits. There needs to be some things that come out of it. SP, I think, as I think about that question of like, what's the next thing? I think we're ripe for a whole new way of content delivery overall. Like the way certainly the models we have today, the disparate models of everything everywhere, separate. I mean, how many different streaming platforms are there? How many different to watch things? How many different platforms are there for podcasts? I mean, the choice is amazing. If you love choice, you're in really good shape right now. But I think it's got to slim down. And I think some things are going to change in the way stuff gets delivered, however that, or gets curated, or how we watch stuff, or how we do stuff. I don't know. I thought VR would be doing some of that, because you have so much customization inside your VR headset to do it exactly the way you want it done, to watch a movie or to listen to a podcast or whatever. And I thought by now we'd be at a spot where VR was taking that. I mean, you can watch a giant movie in your VR headset. I mean, I think it's a great experience. Just hasn't caught on. But so I think the way we deliver media in some way, I don't know what it is, but I think it's ripe for disruption. I think it's all over the place, and it's messy. It's really, really messy. So I think maybe the way we get content.
Yeah, Ralph has a great question, and it's hard to answer. So we're talking about, word of mouth. My brother's like, oh, and my brother and I, it's almost like we're brothers. And it was interesting. I'm going to take a 10-second tangent here. I went to see Pure Prairie League, which has one song that you might have heard in the 70s called Amy. They're kind of known for, that's the band that Vince Gill was in before he was Vince Gill. And my brother's like, hey, my sister-in-law is sick. We got tickets to Pure Prairie League. You want to go? And I was kind of like, no, not really. But it was my brother. And he's like, there are some really good guitar players in this. And so that's the thing. When you have somebody that thinks like he also enjoys really weird, sick, dark humor like I do. And he likes to push the envelope. He's my brother, right? And so we make each other laugh. And even though it was very yacht rocky. It was like a bad imitation of the Eagles, but I still had fun because I was with my brother. So when my brother says you need to watch Young Sheldon, I watched that. All that to say, Ralph says, exactly, Dave. So the $1 million question is, how do you get people to start talking about your podcast? I will be doing an episode about this in the future. I've been working on it. I've got clips from Michael Hyatt. I've got clips from Jerry Seinfeld, Paul McCartney. I don't know if I can play this. Let's see if you can hear this. This is because what I'm looking at, I look at podcasters, but I also look at people that are in the content business. So that's authors and musicians, because they're up against there's lots of people doing music, there's lots of authors, and they're trying to get people to consume their content. So we'll see if this plays. This is a guy named Rick Beato, who has millions of people. He's spoken to Congress about YouTube. Really great guy, and he kind of picks apart music and things like that. And so he's talking about how musicians come to him, like, how do I grow my fan base? And in theory, when I click play.
Is there any advice you would give artists today to become known if they want to promote their own music?
Make great records. The answer is always
still
the
word
same.
of mouth.
Yes, and it's like if you make records that move people, they're going to share them with other people. What the maximum number of people you reach, it's always impossible to say.
Right.
I've been buying some compilations of unknown 60s singles.
A very Jim thing to do.
I just bought one of French singles from the 60s where they're trying to rip off English and American. There's some amazing songs on there, and like, why were these songs not hits?
Yeah.
Well, it's timing, it's luck. I'm not one of the people who believes that the very best records are always the ones that are the biggest hits. Mm-hmm. And I think you agree about that.
I agree.
So all you can do is do your work. People, I'm sure, message you like they message me, what can I do to make my band more successful? It's like,
make a great record.
Make great records.
Yeah. And so he did mention luck. And Mark, again, from practicalprepping.info, he's a member of the School of Podcasting. He was talking about his Facebook group is just going bonkers. And he said, I think I figured it out. He goes, when I first launched it, we had, because of the podcast, had a bunch of people join his group. And that must have somehow flagged Facebook. They're like, hey, something's going on over here. So they kind of added it to a you might like this as well kind of group, and that fed it. But on the other hand, you have to still have the talent and the energy to keep those people around. And so my thing is, like, the last thing I shared was this woman named Sydnie Christmas. That is her name. It's Sydnie. She was on Britain's Got Talent, and she sang Tomorrow. And because Simon Cowell's on that, right? Simon Cowell's the mean guy that tells you suck, and she's like, I'm going to sing Tomorrow, and Simon actually goes, like, oh please, because he's heard everybody wants to sing Tomorrow, or probably I Will. What's the Whitney Houston song? I Will Always Love You. There are some songs that people are like, oh, this will really showcase my stuff, and so he's like, and she starts off, and that song has a certain tempo and beat, right? It's na 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 na, right? It's just, and all of a sudden she threw in like a half a beat different to where it was like, and it wasn't fun and happy and childlike. And also she's got a voice, and then when she sings, like if this is me, and then when I sing, I go, like she's got this weird breathy thing going on. And so it was something I didn't expect. It grabbed me immediately, and then she just slowly, and I picked this thing apart. Like every verse, she would change one note. Like you're like, na 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 na, and you're like, wait, whoa, that's not the note I expected. So I think it's stuff that brings value, right? So it's making you laugh, cry, think, groan, educate, or entertain. And then also, as much as I think people want what they expect. But I talked the guy from The Office, BJ Novak. He was the temp in The Office, the American version, and he was at this Cleveland thing. And somebody said, "Is it kind of hard to write for a character that the audience wants them to do this? Like they want Homer to be stupid, and they want whatever on The Simpsons or whatever." And he said, "Well, we found that you can kind of wiggle them about 5%." And he goes, "So if you want to write outside the storyline, you can to about 5%." And then anything past that, they're like, wait, he would never do that, So right. I don't know. Jim, what do you think makes – I try to reverse engineer it. When I share something, I'm like, why am I sharing this? What do you think?
I think this comes full circle to what we opened the show with. And I personally would replace the word great, so make great content, with the word true. Make true content. And not true from a true and false, but true from a true to who you are, or true to the personality you have, or true to the interests you have, or in some cases, just true to the content itself. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to podcast at work, but I probably wouldn't do that kind of content on my own if I was not doing it for work, right? But the podcasts we create at Gallup need to be made in a style that honors the content itself. And we've created some different styles there. By the way, not everyone that I work with is super excited about the style that we've created
right
there. It's not like it's gotten, even internally, it's gotten universal acceptance. But I think create content that is true, because not everybody's going to like everything. And you're going to, right now, crime stories, true crime, and maybe we're on the backside of that bubble too.
Let's hope.
It gets super popular for a while. Yeah. Super popular for a while. I don't know, 24 Hours still at the TV show.
Oh.
They were a happy couple, and until she murdered him. So I think you've got to just think about, like, how am I true to this, and do it in a way. And sometimes you might be too early. Sometimes you could be too late. Sometimes it could be just right and you don't get any visibility. Sometimes it's dumb luck and you get all the visibility in the world.
Yeah.
Something happens and you get it. And so, but if you're true to the content, I think that's your best. It sets you up to have a good shot at it. Not everybody's goal is to have 100,000 downloads. Some people don't want that. Some people, like I've said this before, with Home Gadget Geeks, I'm not sure I'd want it to get any more popular than it is. I like my audience. They're nice to me. we have a very, very, very friendly Discord group. Nobody I've never have to moderate that. Listen, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I moderate a public professional group on Facebook that I have to moderate at times. These are professionals, right? The group I have for Home Gadget Geeks, just a bunch of guys that have been listening to the podcast for 10 plus years, and everybody's nice to each other. So, maybe your definition might be different of what success is as well, but be true. Like, be great, but be true in that. That's what I'd say.
Yeah. And to your point that not everybody needs a gazillion listeners. So I'm at this place in Kent, Ohio. It holds maybe 600 people, tops. It's kind of weird because you're either up and coming, or like Ace Frehley was there a couple months ago from Kiss, and I was like, that's just sad, right? But in this case, Pure Prairie.
How long has this been in the fridge?
Yeah. And so, but Pure Prairie League had one hit, and it actually came years after it was released. Somebody discovered it. It's called Amy, and they are very much like the Eagles, where Eagles were kind of a rock band that had a little bit of country. This is more of a country band that has a little bit of rock in it. But they had one hit, and it was funny because they made fun of it I love this. In the middle of the concert, they had an intermission, and I'm like, do they just know that everybody in the audience is old and all the men have to pee? Like, I'm not quite sure, but what it was is this is a little theater that's kind of struggling, and so they know if they have an intermission, everybody's going to come out and get another beer and eat some chips. So it's a revenue thing. But I thought about it. I'm like, these guys they had about 500 people there last night, right? Really cool, great venue. The other thing I loved, it wasn't ear-bleeding madness. Like, I didn't walk out going, all I hear is, ee, So it's a really decent time. But, so they had 500 people. I'm going to say the tickets were probably like $47, something like that. And that's $23,000, right? There's 4 guys in the band. You figure the venue's going to take probably 50% of that. They're going to end up with $4,000 for one night. And all they did was fly into Columbus and drive up 2 hours. And then today they're playing in Cincinnati, but they're probably making $4,000 a night per person. And I'm like, with one hit, that was literally 50 years. Well, they're on their 50th anniversary tour, and there's only like 2 guys in the band that are still the original guys. So it goes back to that whole, 1,000 true fans or 500 apparently. So
yeah, well, and I bet they love doing it. They love playing. They love being together.
The thing that
not everybody does, but
they said the guy, the sound guys, like, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kent stage. Just a reminder, Judy Collins is here tomorrow. And yeah, I'm not making that up. And a bunch of other people, blah, blah, blah. And by this time the band has walked on stage and they're like, so ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pure Prairie League. And the guy just said, he just started talking. He's like, look, we don't have a big intro with, smoke machines, because we just like it to feel like we're in your living room playing music. And the thing that got probably the loudest applause was about 4 songs in. He's like, because like the drummer sang one and the keyboard player, and then everybody in the band sang. And he goes, if you haven't noticed, we're all singing. He goes, and everything, he goes, you'll notice there are no laptops on the stage tonight. Everything you hear is coming from the stage. And people went berserk. They're like, yes, this is the way it's supposed to be. People actually playing stuff, to the point where the steel guitar player was ever so slightly out of tune, which drove me and my brother nuts. We're like, oh, it's like when he plays on the lower register, it's like, but that's something, as a musician, I have to stand in the back with my arms crossed and go, yeah, it was good, but the steel guitar player had his guitar out of tune. So, yeah, they did do Let Me Love You Tonight. That was another one. And they were saying how they did kind of poop all over the music industry, saying how they'd had some hits. And we should have been able to retire on some of these. And yet, they're playing Kent, Ohio, on a Friday night. So it is what it is. But what doesn't suck is our awesome supporters. And so if I hit that button, there we go. The awesome supporters that go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. We appreciate everybody who does this. And if I could get, there we go. I cannot get the slide, there we go, to come over to someplace where I can see it. And so we always want to remind you that this show is brought to you by the School of Podcasting.com. If you need unlimited, people think I'm joking, unlimited coaching, yep, that's there. If you got courses, so if you want to kind of go step by step, that's there. And an amazing community. People like Mark Lawley and Ralph from AskRalphPodcast.com are in there. Chris from castahead.net is in there as well. So it's a great, great place. Check it out. Use the coupon code COACH. And remember, that comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And if you go to our website, Ask the Podcast Coach, that's on Podpage. And if you go to trypodpage.com, that is my affiliate link. That's another way to support the show. And we're using Ecamm. If you go to askthepodcastcoach.com/Ecamm. And if you listen to the School of Podcasting, when Mark's episode comes out, we used Ecamm to record that because I'm going to probably cut up some of that and make some videos. And if you need more Jim Collison, and who doesn't, and you're like, hey, I want to know more about home gadget geeks, well, then go over to theaverageguy.tv. Or if you just want to be crazy, you can go to homegadgetgeeks.com. Two ways. Yeah, I know. Two different doors to the same room.
The same place?
If you want to mix it up, you want to get crazy, that's right, homegadgetgeeks.com. And it's time for our awesome featured supporter of the week. It is time for the Wheel o' Names. And so you'll notice where I got Jody's. Jody was our awesome new subscriber last week, and I now have her artwork on here. And so will it be, if it is the wrestling people, I'm going to scream fix, because I just, it's like every week I'm like, wait, how can it be the same people again? Wait a minute. Are these guys, where are the wrestling people?
Maybe we should, oh, did you take them out because they won too much?
No, wait, hold on. I just went to wheelofnames.com and I added Jody. Well, I will add them back. Real life of wrestling something. I'll put a link in the show notes. That's odd that they're not there, because I really just come in. I just added Jody, so I don't know if what I might have done is accidentally replaced the wrestling people. I will. This is something I'll be checking out later. But in the meantime,
Randy said you removed them accidentally last week after they won.
Interesting. Yeah, because
go back and watch the show. Obviously, you don't watch your own show, Dave Jackson.
No. Yeah. Well, that's it. I will add them. But anyway, let's spin that wheel.
Well, they've already been. We've talked about them now.
Yeah, there is. And it is it him? It is the one and only Glenn the Geek Hebert. If you're like, wait, Glenn who? Yeah, this guy. Yeah, if you like horsies, go over and check out Glenn at horseradionetwork.com. That he's actually, I think, our oldest, not oldest in age, but he's our longest supporter. And we thank Glenn for that. And so, am I still on the Wheel of Names? Because I clicked on a button and I'm not seeing things I want to go to here.
No, it says featured supporter of the week.
Yeah. Yes. And of course, as you're listening, did we save you some time? Did we save you some money? Did we actually entertain you or save you a headache or keep you educated? Well, then maybe you should give some of that value back by going to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And again, thanks to all of our awesome supporters who have already done that. We deeply appreciate that.
Can I also say a big thanks to Randy Black, who dropped in a $10 super chat? Is that what they're called? Super chats,
I think. Dropped in a super chat? Yeah, wait, he did. I just see that. That's awesome. Well, then we got to do this. Yeah. Come on, little button. It's supposed to rain, but it's okay. Well, there it is. I was like, where's the money? Jim's in a rave. Thank you very much, my friend.
Ed showed me that last week. Let's see if we can get that.
Yeah, so Jim is putting up, the rock horns here. But Randy says, one of the best quotes to live by is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Do your best work and enjoy the process. Perfection is unattainable, but good is within your grasp. Yeah, I always say if you shoot for perfect and you miss, you're going to land on really, really good. But yes.
I don't know if perfection is unattainable. It's really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's probably some examples, performances that have been perfect. Like you get to the end, whatever that means, and you go, oh my God, that was perfect.
Couldn't do it any better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard, and it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of talent, right? So I think sometimes there's a current movement going on to kind of poo-poo perfection or poo-poo professionalists, say that 10 times fast, right? And it's okay. I mean, yes, sometimes perfection gets in the way of getting things done, right? So some of those kinds of things. But I think this is one of those situations we need to work in a constant tension of completing it and perfection. Because if we're only worried about, this is the world I live in a lot of times. If we're only worried about getting it done, then it's just average most of the time. And sometimes that's okay. But I think we need to be constantly striving for and thinking about how could it, if it was going to be perfect, what could that look like? And I think we need to be striving for that. It's the tension that exists. We don't live in worlds where you get the advantage of only doing one thing. You have to both do it well and be striving for the best possible production that you can get. And that goal is perfection, right? Now you can't let that stop you. You can't let that discourage you. You can't let that, right? But you gotta, I think that tension is good. I think sometimes we think the goal in life is to remove all tension or remove all stress. No. Stress is good. Tension is good. That makes us sharp. That makes us better. So, Randy, not disagreeing with you, by the way. I'm all for that. I think sometimes it discourages us and then we quit, and we don't want that. But please don't forget, like, that tension should drive you to continue to be better and better and better, each week or each month or however you're doing your stuff. Let that tension exist and let it be okay in that. Don't let it stop you. Don't let it paralyze you. But certainly let it be there because it's something good to strive for.
Yeah, and Jody says perfection takes a lot of practice. You don't just attain it the first time you try, if ever, and it's a cumulative thing. Yeah, it takes. Yeah. And I'm with Jim. Anytime I'm learning something new, or like I know on the guitar, I know how to read music. All cats, I forget it, whatever, FACE, and then every car does some, the whole treble clef thing. I know how to read music. I just don't do it very well. And it's hard for me to then look at a piece of music and go, okay, that's a C, that's a G, okay, and a D, okay. But when I can just pick up the guitar and shred, that's like, it's not something I do naturally or whatever. And so there are times when you're in that, and you're like, I just want this to be easy. Randy Cantrell, everything is hard until it's not, right? It's just, that's the way it works. And we want it to be easy. We want to just flick a switch and things like that. That's the frustration. And that's where the passion comes through, or the determination, whichever one it is, to just keep going. I am on and off learning Spanish. I spent like a year, I think, close to it, doing like 5 minutes a day. And I've noticed I've been kind of skipping. And part of it is I switched from Duolingo to Babbel. And Duolingo has a really annoying like logo that just bugs you all the time. Come learn Spanish. Come, you're missing your thing. And they've gamification, all sorts of other stuff. But that's just something where I've just got a lot on my plate right now. And I'm kind of like, but if I really take some extended period off, I'm going to lose where I was. So you have to keep at it. And that's again, with podcasting, kind of the hard part. When you're putting everything you got into it, and you're getting 32 downloads, you're like, what the heck? So it's, perfection is, it's always fun, because I think it was my last episode that I thought was going to be, in my head, it was better than what came out. And I was kind of like, all right, it's not horrible, but it's not really where I wanted to go with that. And luckily I was on a call with a member of the School of Podcasting. He said, man, I really like that last episode. So it's always handy when somebody gives you good feedback, by the way, if it's in a Gmail or what, save that someplace, because there are going to be those times when you're like, I don't even know if it's worth it anymore. And you can go back and see those positive responses and kind of put some fuel back in your tank. You know,
we have a system at Gallup. We have a book called How Full Is Your Bucket? And the whole idea is it's recognition, right? That your emotional, the encouragement that exists inside of you is filled or lowered by the things people say to you, right? It's around recognition. And so this idea of filling up one's bucket, and I think these comments to what you're saying, these emails that you get from people are recognition. And I have a physical, for a while, we made these buckets. They're actually these physical buckets. They're small, but it says how full is your bucket on it. In every note I've gotten since I've started at Gallup, so it'll be 17 years this July, I've put in those buckets. I got one bucket so full, I stole another one so I could start filling it up.
Nice.
But I keep those as a physical representation because you have bad days, right? And so don't, like you said, keep them. Don't just keep them in a file folder somewhere. I'd encourage you to print them off and post them somewhere where you can see it.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's power in that, Dave Jackson. I think there's power in physically seeing it in some form or fashion, or just a reminder of like, oh, no. There are people who like listening to this podcast that I do. I do, when I'm having a bad moment, I can physically look at this bucket and say, oh yeah. So don't squirrel it away electronically unless you're doing that and maybe in a Word doc that you're saving on your desktop, and you could just double click on it. It'll open up and everything you've ever done is there. Do it the way that works best for you. But I think it's key to remember those things, right? To come back to them and remind yourself of them. That's not an ego thing when you do that. That's an encouragement thing. Someone took the time to say, great job. Right. That, I think that's good for the soul. I get those things in a place where you can see them on a regular basis.
Yeah. It's out of sight, out of mind. So when you keep them front and center, yeah, I'm with you. That's not an ego thing. That's like, okay. No. I have,
we need that. We need that.
Yeah.
Like we need those things.
I think I have 5 people have sent thank you cards to my P.O. box. I have a P.O. box because I don't want to give out my address because, you never know who's going to show up. And so to me, the fact that somebody bought a card, wrote my address, had to go buy a stamp probably. I'm like, every time I get one of those, I'm like, wow, so it makes me go check my P.O. box, which I just realized as I say this, I'm like, I haven't checked it in about 2 weeks. And that's the thing that's kind of hard because it's the post office. And by the time I'm out of work to go check it, they're closed. But yeah, I'm with you. Keep that stuff out and, maybe pin it to the wall. I know when we had we still have a Pittsburgh office. We used to have 2 at Lipson. We had a wall where people had sent in comments and we put it on the wall. We also had one where people were like not happy at all. And so we put those out to kind of like, this is what we're trying to avoid and this is what we're trying to keep. So, because some people
one is encouragement and the other is learning, right?
Yeah.
Both of those are very important in what we're doing, feedback and encouragement. Listen, I have a buddy that I work with. He's a PhD, and he, like he said, he posts his on his wall. He had a big bulletin board that he would take from office to office, and he'd get a note, and he just pin it to the board. And you think that's kind of old school and maybe a little cluttered, but that was his thing. And so for him, that he kept those. I liked them jammed in, the bucket, however it works best for you.
Yeah. Craig says we had listeners who send chocolate in the mail, which would be great unless you in like, Africa or something. Like chocolate is not going to sit well, hopefully the air conditioning in the post office is okay.
During the winter, I've gotten beer from listeners. They've sent me localized. We have a beer pour at the beginning of the show or we had one on Home Gadget Geeks, and they'd send me their local beers. Well, that's pretty great.
Yeah.
It's illegal, but it's pretty great.
Right. Well, something to keep in mind, if you send something to somebody, be sure to put a note with it so they know who it's from. Sure. I had somebody send me homemade olive oil, and it's just this bottle with like duct tape on the top. And it wasn't duct tape, but basically they'd closed this, but I didn't know who it was from. And I was like, I don't want to put my tinfoil hat on, but I'm like, I'm not like, and it wasn't until like 2 years later at Podfest, they're like, did you ever get my olive oil? And I'm like, was that you? I was like, it's, how long does that keep? Because it's still in my kitchen. It's like, so be sure to let people know who it's from. Jim, you said there's a book called How Full Is Your Bucket?
Yeah, that's the one I'm referring to that we have for Gallup. Yeah, How Full Is Your Bucket? It's just a recognition system. But listen, it's important we give each other recognition, but I think on the backside, it's also important how we receive recognition. Oh. And I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I was awkward at AF at receiving recognition, and I would poo-poo it. And when I say young, I mean like 45. So I would, I'd be, oh no, don't, don't. And I still have some issues with that. And you think about it, here's someone trying to say, like David, be like, hey, I appreciate you and what you're doing. And the whole time I'm saying that, you're denying it. And you're like, hey, no, I'm saying what's valid to me, to you. Stop denying it. Like, let people, when people are recognizing you, let them do it. You don't need to stand up and say more, right? But appreciate their feedback. And, if you get this via email or whatever, make sure you're doing the same thing on this, but appreciate their feedback as much as they appreciated you, right, in this. But don't try to make it. I was so awkward with it, and I'm still working at getting better at that. When people say, things, flowery things, I'm kind of like, this is making me uncomfortable. Yeah. But just get through it. Say thank you. Say thank you genuinely.
Yeah, I forget which one it was, but I took ex-wife number 2 to a podcast thing, and she loved it because she could sit by the pool and then in the evening go out and network. And somebody came up, and this sounds like a humble brag, but you run into people and they're like, "Hey, I love your show," and blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. And so after about like the third person, and I think they said something like, "Man, I like your show. You're funny." And of course, I said, "Well, looks aren't everything." And the person walked away, and she just looks at me. She goes, "You are horrible at accepting compliments." She goes, "You deflect them with comedy and do this." She's like, she goes, "Just say thank you. Thanks for listening." And so it's something that I've worked on. I remember at Podfest, I was doing a book signing, and this woman came up and said, "Dave, Jack," she's like, "Oh man, like your podcast has helped me launch this and that." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much." And she said, "No." She's like, "You don't like it really." I'm like, "Well, wow, that makes me feel great." And I think I had to come up with like 3 different things to say, because she was like whatever my response was, it didn't match her thing. So like you said, you need to acknowledge those, but it is something that I'm much better at than I used to be. But yeah, because if you don't accept it, you're kind of rejecting it, and then they're like, "Well, okay, sorry, I said I like your show."
Exactly. It's exactly what happens is you're deflecting it. I think we don't do this enough in the American culture, but I think we need to bring back the bow. When you bow to someone, like for those kinds of thanks, sometimes I just want to, I just want to put my hands to the side and give them a healthy bow as a thank you. But yeah, it's key. I think it's key. Yes. Listen, I have a hard time accepting it when people are when people are recognizing me in that way. It's very hard for me. But as we talked about earlier in the show, that's one of those things that you can actually learn and practice and say, "You know what? Thank you. I appreciate you saying that." And it's kind of all it takes. Look them in the eye when they do that too. Look them straight in the eye and be like, "Thank you. I appreciate, you saying that." Because in some cases, it took a lot of courage for them to come to you. And you would think it's not that hard. It actually is for some people. It actually is, right? If you're not good at getting it, you may not be good at giving it as well. And so sometimes we always say, if you feel like you're lacking recognition, look inside. How much are you giving yourself? Like not to you, but to other people. How much recognition are you giving to others? Because oftentimes that recognition will follow that path. If you are doing your job and recognizing other people, oftentimes that recognition will come back. If you're not, it might be a little lonely for you out there. So just remember those things. Do your best to just thank people. Look them in the eye and thank them.
Yeah, Jody says it's such a great point. But it can be hard for those of us who are hard on ourselves. Yep. And then Chrissy from Creating Great Grooming Dogs. I usually say, this is so kind. Thank you. Really, it doesn't have to be, anything. That made my day. Right. John Jamingo said he got a $20 gift card from to a local diner that he mentioned. So that was cool. I actually got that once when I was doing my Akron, Ohio show. It was a new restaurant. They're like, here's a $20, because they know I'm going to mention it on the show. It's cheap advertising, but I'll take a free meal. The other one is don't throw. This is from Hugot. How would you pronounce Hugot? Hugot Radio. You do. This sounds like a Cincinnati thing. Don't throw people's gifts away. That's why I don't drink coffee, but I do have, this is from the Dog Podcast Network. Previous sponsor on Ask the Podcast Coach sent me a mug, and I do drink hot chocolate. So I just have I have a cabinet full of coffee mugs that I wait for the winter to drink. There you go.
Got the Horse Radio Network myself.
Got another one. I have a lot of pens and scissors on my desk. So yeah, there you go. Randy has said there's another book called Keep Your Bucket Overflowing by Pastor Jimmy Pruitt, which is living up in a down world. I met him at Spark. He's a really nice guy. He and I forget his wife's name, but he's a really cool guy.
SP says, look at your complimenter in the eye, unless they're an engineer. Then look in their shoes. Yeah. Look them in their shoes. Yes, I like that. That is
I think Craig hits it on the head here. There's a fine line to be walked between accepting compliments while keeping your ego in check. And I think that's what I just don't want to ever appear like an egomaniac. I want people, I still always think it's odd when people say, I was going to come up to talk to you, but I don't know, I got nervous. And I'm like, what? Yeah. Like how? Yeah. But so
the ego in check concept, that's another tension that's good, that exists in our life, for the tension between accepting it and letting the ego run away. That's a good place to be. Like live in that. Always be thinking, okay, did I do this right? Did I get it? I had a meeting this week. I had 2 meetings this week back to back where I was giving, it was a little bit of advice giving. People had said, hey, I got some questions for you, this work related stuff. The first one got really well. It went really well. And I was feeling pretty good about myself. And the second one, I may have got out a little ahead of myself in some of the things I was saying, and it didn't go as well. And I got off the call and I was like, yeah, I let that slider go a little too far to the comfort side as opposed to the keeping myself in check side of things. And it would have been better if I would have talked less and listened more in that conversation, right? I kind of got full of like, oh yeah, I know what I'm saying. This stuff, I'm going to inspire people. Well, not really, not really. So that tension is good. I always tell people, sit in that tension, let it exist, be uncomfortable, because I think that uncomfortableness makes us better.
And Randy has let me know I just said something wrong, which is great. That's not a book from Pastor Jimmy. That's a saying. So I got that wrong. And then Jody's saying, hey, I wouldn't be upset if used her, apparently I have a mug in my P.O. box waiting for me. And so I'll have to go over there and get that. So
I put headphones. Sometimes I put batteries. Glenn has batteries. And this is where because I have a device that uses up batteries, but it doesn't use them up completely. Yeah, it's just one of those. It's very sensitive to that. So I throw them in here. Then when my mouse runs out of batteries, I replace them with this, because the mouse doesn't take very much power. So there you go, Glenn. Thanks for the mug. Yeah,
Jody says it can feel weird. I will say that when it comes to performance, whatever that means to people, whether you're acting or singing or talking or whatever, if you don't have that nervousness, and I still laugh. I mean, I've been doing presentations forever, and if I'm at an event, my hands turn whiter than they normally are and start to sweat about 4 to 5 minutes before I talk. And instead of going, oh crap, I'm, nervous about this, I just look at me, I'm so excited to talk, which is really what it is, I think. And once I start, I'm good. Once they go, please welcome Dave Jackson, and I grab the mic or whatever it is, I'm good to go. It's just in the immortal words of Tom Petty, the waiting is the hardest part. So, it is what it is. Yeah.
That nervous tension is good when I have guests on and they're like, I'm so nervous. And I'm like, yes, like that's the best place to be. I say, don't let it overcome you. Don't let it paralyze you. But live in the tension of that nervousness, because it makes us sharper. It makes us better. It makes us, makes us sharper and better. And I think sometimes when we relax too much, your mileage might vary, but at least for me, Dave, I need to live in that tension.
Yeah. We're learning new words here. I sponsored, he says, my Roadcast, a People's Choice winner in 2019. And so apparently I sponsored this. And he says, I got third place. It's hugot. It's a Filipino word, a verb that means to pull or to draw out, like expressing feelings, which ties in very nicely to today's discussion. So, and then Jason says, I use my Better Podcasting mug multiple times a week. So there you go. No, that's good. Do you have, how are we doing on time? Favorite swag to get?
This thing by far. I have used this, like, I'm not saying that here. I'll hold it back up.
There you go.
I'm not saying that because, I am kind of saying it because Dan's a sponsor, but Dan sent me part of the mug sponsorship here is you get to send me a mug. And I'm not saying, no, I won't say it, but so Dan sent me this one, and it's a really nice, it's one of those you don't put the dishwasher because it's really, really nice. And I have used this thing for everything. So it's great. Keep stuff cold. I've taken it, I take it outside. I've had both coffee and Guinness in this, which is just delicious.
Multi-purpose.
I've had them together. Those taste good together. So anyways, yeah, this has been my favorite bit of swag for sure.
I love t-shirts until people ask me, what size are you? And I'm like, well, it's going to shrink. So let's go 3XL. I'm like, cause it's really 2XL and, so shirts are always fun, but yeah. So
chat room, throw in your favorite. What's some favorite swag as we think about wrapping it up?
Pens are good. Who is this? Oh, this is an advert. This is old. This is a collector's item. This is an advertised cast pen, because now it would say Libsyn ads. But what other pens do I have sitting here? Christie. That's all it says. Christie dot. So thank you, Christie, for the pen. That's always fun. We had a discussion about business cards. And if you're going to give somebody a bit, now I realize, because I have 5 here from my last event. And this is why you give business cards, because before I throw this away, I'm going to put this into Evernote or my less annoying CRM. I realize when you hand somebody a business card, you're kind of going, hey, can you throw this away later? But if it's good, then, it comes in handy. Oh, the answers are coming in. Ralph says gold bars. Yeah, that's my favorite kind of swag. Daniel J. Lewis from The Audacity to Podcast and the Future of Podcasting likes cookies or chocolate. Craig likes t-shirts. Coaster, that's another handy one. I've got I
got one too.
I have one now. Cap Show. Yeah, that one's kind of hard to read. What is it?
Yeah, it's based on a true story podcast. Dan sent this one as well. He was trying this out, right? So a little coaster.
Yeah.
Kind of cool. Yeah.
Sticker Mule is, their prices are a little pricey, but they throw a lot of stuff on sale. So every time they're like, t-shirts, $9. I'm like, time to buy a t-shirt. In fact, I want to get one that just says like #curmudgeon and put those on.
Old guy.
Yeah.
Old guy.
Stickers, pins, not pens. Sorry about that. Pins from Ken Blanchard. Very cool. So all that stuff. USB sticks are costly, but I have a few that are branded.
They're kind of falling. Yeah, they're kind of falling out of favor.
Yeah. Dave, have you ever heard of this thing called Dropbox? You might want to look into it.
Remember this internet thing? Yeah, it caught on, and you don't need USB sticks.
Yeah, and then Jody is using Zazzle, which sounds like, I don't know what Zazzle sounds like. Sounds like something you either, like a wizard, Zazzle, or something you would scream maybe when you're on fire or something like, Zazzle! Hit yourself with a hammer or something like that. He got,
is that like Bazinga?
Yeah.
Is that the new Bazinga?
Bazinga. Todd the Gator says he got chocolate from Norway. It had a hand-painted picture of the podcast icon. How cool is that? Yeah. That's some thought into that.
I got coffee.
Yeah, that's true.
I got a listener to this show, Chris, sent me coffee. That what's great, because I have since bought 20 pounds of it from.
He's a great drug
Island
dealer, man.
Coffee.
The first one's free.
Yeah. Here, Jim, you got to try this. And I'm like, this is the best coffee I've ever had. And I've just kept buying it. It's awesome. Chris, thanks for.
What kind of coffee is that again?
It's Island Coffee, EILAND, Island Coffee, I think at Richardson, Texas. And it's super, super good.
Nice. Well, Jim, what is coming up on Home Gadget Geeks?
Yeah, Marv B, Uncle Marv, in our chat room joins me. We do some listener feedback, which is a ton of fun. We just we go through some emails that had come in over the last couple of weeks and spend some time. And then question he pulled off of last week's show is the PC dead? And that was actually a really good conversation to have on my show. So we spend a bunch of time, get his opinion on it as well. It's now available, theaverageguy.tv or homegadgetgeeks.com.
That's a great question, because my PC is getting a little old in the tooth. And I'm kind of like, do I just, what am I going to do with that? So it's going to be interesting. So on the School of Podcasting, I already mentioned, I'm interviewing Mark. I'm doing the old narrative style thing. If I can do that with interviews, I just get done and go, okay, because mainly what's fun about that is I basically turn off my channel and I just listen to his answers and I'm like, yep, that's good. That's good. On occasion, I'll turn it on to see what the heck did I ask him to say that. But man, I ramble on. I love to give background information to my guests, like, hey, I know you did this and that and blah, 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 yada, 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 on and on and on and on. And then finally a question. I'm like, okay, we don't need all that stuff. So that's coming up on the School of Podcasting. I want to say thanks to our awesome chat room. If you haven't liked, subscribe, and rang the bell, well, what are you waiting for? And thanks to Mark over at podcastbranding.co. Remember, they see you before they hear you. And Dan from basedonatruestorypodcast.com. And if you haven't become an awesome supporter, well, just go to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And we'll give you a big shout out next week. So thanks so much to everyone. We'll see you next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach.
This podcast is part of the Power of Podcasting Network. Find it at powerofpodcasting.com. Changing the world, one download at a time.